Hello, my name is Lexi Davis. I'm a self-discovery coach, a yoga and meditation instructor, a love enthusiast, and a really playful human being. I serve people through my business, Alive to Enjoy, and this is Heart Snuggles, a holistic wellness podcast where I invite guests to drop into their heart space through authentic conversations and compassionate intentions, all in mini cuddly episodes, hoping that you connect to your truth in the most authentic version of yourself. I hope you enjoy. Welcome everyone to Heart Snuggles. We're so happy you're here today, and we hope that you find a piece of joy in your day as well. And I brought a really incredible guest. So if you go ahead and give yourself a little intro, that'd be wonderful.
Yes. Hi, everyone. So happy to be here. My name is Tiffany Keesey, and I'm the co-founder of a consulting firm called Conscious Culture. And what we do is we work with a lot of growing businesses and startups to create healthy cultures within the workplace. So we do that through helping develop leaders and focusing on your core values, and then also helping set up some of the foundational HR systems and processes that support your business and really reinforce that healthy company culture.
So important and unreal. Like, it's so crazy. I was so happy when I found you because I'm like, this is so needed in the world. So will you tell us some like bad things that you see in a lot of company cultures first?
Oh my gosh. I'm sure everyone has stories and everyone can relate to this. I personally feel lucky that I've worked with mostly really wonderful workplaces, but every place has their pros and cons. But what you can see in the unhealthy company cultures is a lot of competition or individualism, right? So instead of feeling like you're on a team, you're constantly afraid of how you're measuring up and if you're going to get fired. I think that fear can be so toxic because, as we now know, that puts us in our fight or flight brains, and then we're actually not able to perform at our best. And so you're spending so much time and energy and brain power thinking about if you're going to get fired, or like if your boss is mad at you, or if someone else is trying to like undercut you. So it really takes away from not only your well-being and your joy at work, but also your ability to do a good job. So that's one thing that can happen a lot. And then the other, I think, is just the negativity that comes from, when people lose trust in leadership and start to roll their eyes when leaders say they're, trying a new initiative or they're going to do this or that. And a lack of trust in a culture can lead to just a lot of disengagement and a divide between kind of like this us and them mentality. So that's another thing that you can see happen a lot too. And it's hard. It's not impossible to recover from, but it is hard, and makes people feel kind of like isolated. And, I think eventually people end up leaving, right? If they don't have trust or faith in their leadership.
Yeah, that's a huge one. And it just makes it sets it when there's not a strong foundation, that's really hard for you to grow and to flourish. And trust is like one of the essential parts of life. So we need to be able to trust our fellow cohorts, and then like also, of course, the people we look up to. Like, that makes it really difficult when you can't trust someone that you're supposed to be following.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then I think the last thing, I actually started in the nonprofit world, and so a big part of it was just overwork, and part of it was self-imposed, because when you're working for a cause, you're like, how do I stop working at 5 p.m. and go do yoga? Like, how do I prioritize myself when there are people dying, that are depending on this work? And so definitely have also experienced those just incredibly high-paced workplaces, especially if you're in like a cause-driven environment or a startup, that just do lead to this like perpetual burnout. And that could be a really hard cycle too.
Yeah, that's probably a super, super common one for most people as well. But I can't, imagine being in that nonprofit too. It's like, oh, your heartstrings. Makes it so much harder. Yes. So tell us how you help reshape companies' work culture.
Yes, well, it can feel overwhelming, but I think the foundational starting place is really looking at the company's vision, mission, and values. So, like, what are you here to do? What is the world that you want to create? And then your values are really like, how do we want to treat each other? And I believe every company has a culture. Again, it could be a great culture, it could be a mixed one or a more negative one. So it's really coming to terms with, where is our culture at right now? What are our core values, and are we living into them or not? And I think when we're seeing some parts of the negative culture, it's because you're not fully living into those values or like reinforcing them through everything, your communication, the way you make decisions, the way you hire and manage performance and fire people and all of that. So we really start by like doing an assessment and looking at the values. And sometimes companies will bring us in because they're like, we have values, but like they're kind of confusing or like, I don't think they're totally right. So we do a long process of saying, truly, what do these mean? And not just what are they conceptually, but how do they inform the way that we act every day? So, for example, I was working with a client this week, and one of their values is around like a freedom to fail. They want people to take risks without the fear of, again, failure or getting punished, and really looking at mistakes, quote unquote, mistakes as a learning opportunity and thinking about how can we learn from this? How do we improve the process? How do we not blame the person, but rather kind of fix the process? And so that's kind of a core piece that then if we are really clear on what that value is and how those behaviors manifest in the day-to-day, then your team can be really clear about how to live into them more and more. And you start to really create clear expectations about how you want people to operate. And then you can reinforce those too. So for example, then when you're looking to hire someone new, you can ask them about what is their, beliefs around failure, or when have they failed in the past and what have they learned from it, or things like that. So we can really weave them in after we clarify our values and communicate them, weave them into all our people, processes, and systems so that it's continually self-reinforcing.
That's beautiful. I love that process. And it's so important to break it down like that, because it's like, yeah, this is my value, but it's like, or it's the same thing with goals. It's like, yeah, this is my goal, but then we just leave it at that and we don't touch it. It's like, it needs to be broken down into small parts that it's actually like integrated.
That's such a good analogy, because yes, with goals, it's like you can set them and forget them. And like, then in 6 months, you're like, oh, I just forgot we even had goals, or I forgot we even had values. And, the thing with values too, is they can mean so many things to so many people. And you often see these broad words like integrity or like teamwork. And if you have 100 people, they probably have 100 different interpretations of what that means. And so again, really being clear on like, what does that actually look like in the day to day? And if integrity is our value, what does that mean? And what does that look like if we're living into it?
Yeah, that's a super good point too. We all have our own definitions of things. We think it's universal, but it's really not. Even success, like every word is not universal. So that's such a good point to help leaders remember that too, to teach their people and to have a clarifying definition. So if someone were like is in a work environment that's like really toxic and they're starting to realize it and wanting to change, how can they use their voice to speak up to their leadership?
That's a really good question. And I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to this, because in some places it actually might not be safe to speak up. So I would say like really do a self-assessment and think through like how safe is it? Because the reality is in some workplaces you could speak up and get punished. Obviously, that's like, I think it's a real failure of HR and a real failure of leadership. But there might be times where the best option is for you to leave. And we're seeing a lot of that right now. It's actually being called the Great Resignation. People are just leaving in droves. I think it's like 4 million people a month are quitting their jobs, and like half of people out there are actively looking for other jobs. So you're not alone if you're like, this place is toxic and I can't change it. But all that to say, like, I do think it is important to use your voice, especially if there is safety. And so hopefully there's venues for you to give feedback, whether that's talking to your supervisor or talking to one of the leaders. Like if you have engagement surveys that go out, like sharing your honest feedback in an anonymous survey could be really helpful. There is HR, like talking to them. There are ways to use your voice. And I think I always tell people when they're giving upwards feedback, like when you're talking to a leader or a boss, to really frame it in the positive, to say like, I love this place. I love what we're trying to do. I do feel like we could do better in X, Y, or Z area. Like, are you open to talking about it or hearing my suggestions? And our leader will hear that so much differently than this place is toxic. This is terrible. I hate working here, right? Like, because the leader's gonna be like, what am I supposed to do about it? And so I think if you can really ground it in, like, I have some ideas. I'd love to see us, be more collaborative if that's like one of our values, then kind of framing it in that way. And another way you can frame it is if the values aren't clear, maybe saying like, hey, I really think it'd be a great idea to clarify what our values are. Or like, I also see a lot of times employees asking for HR support, especially if it's a small team, to say like, is there any way we could have HR? Because it's nice to have that like neutral person that you can go to that can help coach you in having those conversations, or who can bring those to leadership and kind of protect your identity too. So there's lots of different routes, but I do think it's important to share what you're seeing. And I think, most good leaders are really open to feedback, especially if you put it in a constructive way or a positive way where you're trying to partner with them to make it better.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to frame that. And it makes me so sad how many people aren't safe in their work environments. And, they're so scared to talk to them. Like when I hear stories, I'm like, what? Like, that is not okay, but it's just so normalized, but it's not normal. Like, please do not let that be normal for you. And know that there's so many cool work environments now, and like conscious cultures. And it's just really beautiful. We need to like keep standing up for that, because we are so valuable. And if we're being treated like that at work, which is where we're at most of the day, like that's not okay.
It isn't. I know. And I think when we get stuck in those environments, it's easy to normalize it. So I love what you just said, because it's not okay. And the great news is like every company is hiring right now. And so it's a great time to look for other jobs and to ask them, like when you're in the interview process, you're interviewing them too. And so ask them like, how do you manage performance? How do you set goals? What does success look like? Are there opportunities for me to grow and develop? How do people describe your culture? What are your values? All these things you can really try to get to know a company. Also read their Glassdoor reviews. See what employees are saying about what it's like to work there. And definitely, don't settle for a place that doesn't let you speak up, because that's a really hard position to be in.
I love that you said that too, that you're interviewing them too. People are just so like, same with love, like, oh, someone chose me, I'll go for it. Or, or with a job, like, oh, they're hiring me, I'm going for it. It's like, no. You have a say, you stand in your power, because just because one person wants to hire you, like, that's not it. Like, make sure it is aligned with you. Like, your whole thing is about values. And I think that's so important. So really make sure your values are aligned. Same thing with love. Like, really make sure your values are aligned, and don't just settle for the first thing that wants you.
Absolutely.
And you were talking about leaders. And so what are some, if they are a good leader, so what are some qualities that you make sure you teach leaders so that they are doing a good job?
Yes, it's such a good question. And I think it's really important that leaders are modeling the values and the behaviors that they're asking of other people. And so a lot of times leaders will come to me and they're like, oh, our team needs to be, again, maybe more collaborative, or I want people to speak up more in meetings. And I think it's important to realize as leaders, you really set the tone. And there is a power dynamic where people are going to be a little bit more afraid to speak up, right? And so it's important to say like, okay, if people aren't giving us feedback, well, let's look at that. Why is that? Are we not giving them an opportunity to give feedback? Do we need to build a little more trust? Trying to get to the root cause of it and realizing that your actions are really going to set the tone. And so also what happens when someone gives you feedback? Do you thank them? Do you argue with them? Do you shut them down? Do you consider it? Even if you can't even if you don't act on the feedback, do you say, oh, wow, thank you so much for sharing that? Like, that's really helpful insight. And we can't do that now, but we'll consider it in 6 months, And so as leaders, we're constantly setting that tone, and our people will pick up on that and behave in kind usually. And so I really do try to help them understand just the amount of influence that they have, and how people do hang on to their words and their actions. And that's really important. And then the other thing is we do want to create that like psychological safety and trust. And part of that is through things like what I talked about a little bit earlier, making sure we don't punish people for mistakes, but rather see them as learning opportunities. Because most mistakes actually aren't like blameworthy. It might be like a breakdown in process or system. So really kind of building the conditions for trust. I think transparency is another great leadership quality, where you can be transparent about what you're learning, how you're growing, even how you've messed up. Transparent with like your strategy, your decision making. The more transparency you have, the more you're bringing people into the process and including them, and then empowering them to do their jobs. And then the next thing I'll say is just really having that combination of being focused on results, which most leaders are, but also really empowering people to do their jobs with autonomy. So I think a lot of us want flexibility and freedom. That also has to be boundaried with clear direction and accountability. But if we're able to set clear expectations, let people know what their jobs are, what their goals are, what the end result is that you want, then really empower them to do the work in the way that they see best, to make decisions on their own, and kind of giving that freedom, flexibility, and empowerment, you're going to see a really engaged team on the other side.
Yeah, yay. I love all those. They're really great qualities and super important for everyone to learn at some point, even if you're not a leader, like it's a good way to live. And I remember I haven't worked many corporate jobs, but there was one that I did, and it was the most beautiful work environment. And they truly they did all those things that you said. And it made me feel so safe to mess up. And it made me feel so safe to talk to them about anything. And they gave me so much freedom, and it really changes how I felt. And I was so excited to show up to work. And I just really feel like share my voice as an employee. And I think that is so important.
That's amazing. Did they do anything else that really made you feel that way that you'd add to the list?
One time when I was working as a receptionist, or it was a community manager at this concierge portal thing. Anyways, it was for corporations, and I was on my phone at one point, and someone reported me, and they took me in and hey, we got a report for you that you were texting at work, and we just want to sit you down and make sure are you doing okay? Where did we go wrong? And they were putting it all on them. And I was like, what? Obviously this is my fault. I was texting, what are you talking about? But they were truly just trying to understand. And they're like, can we give you more work? What do you need? And it was just so beautiful. It wasn't don't do that, but it was let's work together to figure out a solution to this. And I think, it was so nice.
That's amazing. Yeah. They're taking responsibility of oh, wow, maybe you're bored and we can give you more responsibility. Or because when you punish people, if they had just punished you for that, then you're going to start to disengage. You might still do the same thing, but just hide the thing. Right. And you're going to be less engaged in your work. And so it's, I think there's sometimes is a point, maybe if that had kept happening, maybe at that point they're okay, Lexi, what's going on? Right. But especially to start out by being curious and understanding they play a role in that too. It's a really great starting point.
Yes. And I was bored. I was I need more stuff to do.
Right.
Not giving me enough. So that curiosity I think is so beautiful. And it was so genuine too. It wasn't the fake, I don't know, sometimes it feels not authentic, but they're really authentic in their approach. I think that was great.
Yeah. Curiosity is a huge one. It really helps us from jumping to conclusions and making assumptions and oftentimes assuming the worst about someone else.
Yes. And I thought of another question is, when a leader makes a mistake, how do you help them remove their pride or their ego to share that they, it's that they've made this mistake,
Yes. Oh my goodness. That's such a good question. And I think it kind of the deeper thing in that is, as a leader, it's really important to be doing your inner work, because we are all showing up as the imperfect, messy, beautiful versions of ourselves. And so we're bringing with us our strengths, but also some of our hangups. And I think a lot of high achievers, I work with a lot of high achievers, and they're so hard on themselves. Truly, they're their own worst critic. And so we talk a lot about feedback and receiving feedback. And oftentimes they're I'm saying things to myself that are worse than any leader would say to me. And so I think that's really common, is that we can be our own worst critic. We can be really hard on ourselves and be afraid to share that we messed up. But I would say to leaders, it actually really builds trust with people when you can say that you messed up. I think people respect you so much more than trying to cover it up or play it off. Because the reality is, people will probably be aware that there was a mistake made, or maybe just a misjudgment, or something could have been better. And so the more transparent you are about it, not only does it give safety net for other people to be in the process of learning and to be in that messy process, but it really does help them respect you and learn from you. So they get to learn from your process and your mistake too. And they get to carry that with them. So there's so many benefits to it. And I think just helping people see you're not going to lose respect from people. In fact, it'll be the opposite. And then once you experience it and you're like, okay, like, people didn't call me out, or like, yeah, that actually went really well. It's like you experience it, it goes well. And then that builds a little more of that muscle to do it again. So I think it's also important to try these things. And then once they go well, to like really make sure that like lands. I'm going to go a little bit more into like embodiment and somatics here, but like actually landing that positive experience. And so now like you have that felt experience of it went well as a leader. Like I now know that in my body and I can do that again, is really important to help change that pattern.
Yeah. Yes. It's perfect. I think that so true. Like we need to always take the action. Like this is such a big thing I always talk about, because I got stuck in that. Like I was always learning and not implementing anything. And so you just got to do it. You just got to practice doing those things. And as a leader, that's what you're supposed to be doing. Like you got to take those risks and try new things, and and really, really remove your ego as a leader.
Absolutely. I'll say one more thing. There's this woman named Sheila Heen who's done a lot of research around feedback, and she talks about why it's so hard for us to receive feedback. And this is a little different than admitting a mistake, but I think it's a similar kind of hits on a similar theme, where a lot of times it's so hard for us to hear feedback because we make it about our identity. And so if someone tells me like, hey, Tiffany, like you were a little slow on that deadline, what happened? I could hear like, I'm a failure. I can't do anything right. That's not what the other person is saying, but that's the filter I'm applying to it, or like what I'm projecting onto it. And I think as leaders, again, being that fear of kind of saying we're not perfect, we might be projecting our identity onto it. So if we can like detach the identity piece of like, if you made a mistake, it doesn't mean you're a failure. It doesn't mean you're an imposter, right? Kind of like pull apart the identity, then it's a lot easier to say like, well, could have done that better, and it can just be that. It's not deeper. It's not about who you are. It's not about your identity or worth.
That's beautiful point. It's something that's been coming up a lot in my life as well. So how does someone detach from the identity though?
It's like a practice for me too. It truly is. I think it just is catching those like negative thoughts when they come up. Like when you start hearing like, oh my gosh, I'm a failure, I could have done that better. It's just not letting yourself go into that spiral and telling yourself a new story. Like it's okay to make mistakes. Like mistakes are just learning opportunities, right? It's like catching those negative thoughts and then interrupting them and telling yourself something different. But have you found anything else that works for you?
Yeah, I think it's that too. Like I still sometimes it hurts, but like, just realizing like, okay, this is just one person's perspective. And like, what I like to do is like, what is the truth in this for me? And what is maybe just their projection? Because I think it is sometimes a combination of the two. So if I can but I think the most important part is like pausing and stepping back and zooming out the perspective and like, okay, like, is there any truth in this? Let's be real. And I'm pretty good at being real with myself. So I think that just takes time with like getting to the honesty, and then like, is maybe some of it something that they're working through that they're putting onto you.
Right. And that goes back to curiosity, about being curious yourself. If you're the one getting feedback, to be like, well, they might not have said that perfectly. Might not be 100% accurate. But is there some like gem in here that I can take away? Or is there something actually valuable? And how do I sort through what's helpful and what's not helpful, and use this as an opportunity to learn and to be better? And take some of it. You don't have to take all of it. You get to decide what you want to receive from that feedback.
Definitely. And I think another thing too that I've been working on too is like, okay, when I receive something hard, like resourcing myself, like what can I do to fill myself up now so that I don't feel that spiral and feel like I am a failure. I'm like, no one's going to love me. Like, how can I make myself feel loved, or whatever the thing that I'm feeling, like try to fill my own cup up after receiving that.
Right. I know. And I feel like mindfulness is so helpful here too, of like, go outside, feel your feet on the floor, take a few deep breaths. And then sometimes that emotion passes through, it's like that initial, like, oh no, that hurt. Or like, oh my gosh, I'm the worst. And if you like take a few breaths, oftentimes like that kind of passes and you're like, okay, maybe that's not what they meant.
Yes. And if someone is an entrepreneur or only has like a very small team, how do you help them?
Yes. So we really kind of focus on the basics with entrepreneurs. And sometimes at like the very early stage, really about like logistics, like how do I hire my first employee, and are they an employee or a contractor, and some of that more like HR stuff. But if you're an early stage entrepreneur, you have a small team, but really think about, again, your values, like establishing them up front, but then also being really careful about who you hire and then investing in them. So what we often see with small teams, especially as they grow, is you bring in people who are really great for right now, but if we're not helping them grow and develop, then the company can kind of outgrow them, which can be painful because then you have to hire over them, or maybe they have to transition out. And so one thing you could be thinking about is, how do I hire just really adaptable people who are quick learners, who want to grow and develop, who can probably take on a lot of different things? And then how do we give them opportunities to make sure they're continuing to grow and hopefully can grow with the company as we get bigger? So those would be the really important things, is making sure you have a good hiring process, because hiring the wrong person can be really hard on a small business. It can just take up so much time and resources. So really get that down. And then again, think about people who have that quality where they just want to continue to grow and develop, and think about how you can do that. And that does not have to cost a lot of money. Actually, 70% of development opportunities happen on the job. So it can be like, have them shadow you, or take on a stretch project, or present in front of a team in your place, or something like that, where they get to have opportunities to keep sharpening their skills.
Yeah, that's so important. And how do you interview someone to see if they're adaptable and like capable of that?
So a few things. I love kind of putting in the job posting, being a little more clear about like what it is that you're looking for. And so from the start, you're attracting people who have those qualities. So thinking about, who is my ideal candidate? Like, what's their experience? What type of qualities do they have? And then say a lot of that in the job posting, and then think through. So now that we know who our ideal candidate is and like what our criteria is, how do we craft interview questions around that? And I like to ask about past times, like situational questions that make them give you an example of when they've had to be adaptable in the past. Because anyone, if you say, are you adaptable? Anyone can say like, oh yeah, absolutely. But asking about like, when was a time where maybe you were working towards a project and like the goal changed halfway through? Like, what did you do? How did you adapt to that? When have you worked within like ambiguity before? And when have you had to create a process from nothing? Questions that kind of get at this ability to be adaptable or operate in ambiguity, and really having them dig into past experiences, because that will tell you if they've been able to do it before or not. And then it's always a great idea to call references too, to ask them. And then I'm not sure if this would work on the flexibility side, but I like to also give people an assignment when they apply. So they would apply, have an interview or two, and then give them an example work assignment so you can actually see what their skills are. So for example, when we were hiring our associate, we knew like, we're going to hire someone, they probably won't have HR experience. That's fine. But I'd rather they be like a great researcher and a quick learner. And so we gave our top 2 candidates a 2-hour window. And we said, we want you to research how to set up an internal mentorship program at a company and write up a memo and tell us when you have a 2-hour window, and we'll send you the assignment and then you'll send it back at the end of the 2 hours. And it was just so incredible to see like the difference in the quality of work, and how people approached it, where they got in the process. And it was a big determination in who we hired. And he's been amazing. He's like so adaptable, such a quick learner, and had a lot of those like qualities that we were looking for.
That's great. I think that's so important too. I recently did a job interview to be someone's assistant. She had us do like a few different tasks. Like she had like 4 different interview sections, but each one, and I was like, that is so smart, because you're really seeing like them in work, because you can't necessarily do a trial period. Like it's kind of hard to do that. I mean, I guess you could, but that's just the best way to do it beforehand. And for those things, do you pay them, or is it just part of the interview process?
That's a good question. I'm glad you asked that, because if they're doing any real work for you, it should be paid. And so if they're doing something that's like an actual task, or that you're going to like use with clients, that absolutely is paid work. So if not, you don't have to pay, but you have to be really careful that you're not asking them to do either like a ton of unpaid labor where it takes them like 10 hours or 20 hours. Like that's just not fair to people. And then secondly, just really making sure it is a sample thing and it's not going to be any work product that you use. You want to be careful there to make sure you're not asking people to do unpaid work.
Yeah, that's huge because that's not okay. And if you don't have the resources to pay them, then don't hire someone.
Yes, absolutely. If you don't have the resources to pay them or like pay them well and like have kind of the whole package, then, you really should evaluate if this is a position you can hire for.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And it's hard. Like I'm an entrepreneur and I need people right now, but I don't have the resources necessary to pay them. So it's like getting myself stable enough so that I can, because I don't want to undercharge anyone. And I want to it's a hard place to be, like where I'm at. So if you're in that position, I understand, but it's also not fair to like underpay someone, I don't think at all.
Right. It is hard. And I'm with you. We made that commitment again, coming out of nonprofits where you see so many like unpaid interns and unpaid labor. My partner, Bentley, and I have just decided like we're going to pay people what they're worth. And, that comes at a cost, but it's a real commitment we've had to make sure that we're not like taking advantage of anyone, whether they're an employee or a contractor, right? Like our designers and people who've helped us get our business set up.
And how do you choose to do contract or employee?
So if it depends what state you're in, especially California, where I'm based or where we're both based, is very strict on who's an employee and who's a contractor. And they have what's called an ABC test. So you can look it up if you're kind of going through this, or you can ask your lawyer. They can really help you. But basically, if it's someone who is core to the operations of your work, they should be an employee. If it's someone like, so for us, we've hired like a graphic designer as a contractor, which is fine because we're not a graphic design agency, right? Like our accountant, like things like that, where they are an independent business. They probably have multiple clients. They set their own hours. It's more like on deliverables. They're not like reporting into you, but they're just delivering a project. And that's, again, not core to your business. Like if we were a design agency, we would have to hire that designer as a temporary employee. But because we're an HR consulting firm, if we're hiring web designers or graphic designers, they can be contractors. But Google the ABC test. That can give you a little bit more insight. If you're not in California, there's probably a little bit more flexibility, but you still want to make sure that they're not essentially an employee, because you could then get like all these penalties for owing them back pay and overtime and benefits and things like that.
Yes. Thank you so much. Those are great. Everything you said was so wonderful. And I'm so happy you came on today. And I just have one more question for you, which is the question of the podcast. And that was, what was the last random act of kindness someone did for you?
Oh, that is a good question. I'm gonna have to think for a second.
Yeah, take your time.
Last random act of kindness. It's not a total stranger, but just recently I was like feeling pretty sick, and one of the girls who contracts with us just sent a little Venmo payment, like completely unprompted of, do something to help yourself feel better. And it's just those little kind things that mean so much. And it was really thoughtful.
Yeah, that's a beautiful moment. I love when my friends do that. I'm like, I'm having a bad day. And they beg me, like, go buy a tea or a treat. And I'm like, oh, thank you.
You're like, oh, someone cares. It's so thoughtful. Yeah.
It's so small, but it makes the biggest difference. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And if someone want to work with you, what are you offering and where can they find you?
Absolutely. So you can go to our website, which is conscious-culture.co. You can also find us on LinkedIn and Instagram. And if you want to work with us, we're actually booking out for like one-on-one client work for 2022, crazy enough. But we're also really developing a lot more like courses and things, especially for small businesses where, resources might be tight. We just really want to make good HR accessible to small businesses. So the best way to do that is just to go to our website, sign up for our email list, and you can we'll keep you up to date on like the new courses and things that we're putting out.
Yay. Thank you so much for coming on today.
You're so welcome. This was so fun. I really enjoyed it, Lexi.